Chapter 1334. Before attacking the Vishnu Palace, Chu Xiu did not expect that Yin Tuoyuo would be here. The information that Tian Luo Pasha gave him was that there was only one old martial immortal in the Vishnu Palace, and Chu Xiu could capture him easily. Although there were some mistakes, it was not a big deal. Anyway, Chu Xiu's goal was to seize the origin, and his second goal was to weaken the Sanskrit force as much as possible. There was no direct relationship between Yin Tuoyuo and Yin Tuoyuo. As soon as Chu Xiu shouted, Master Yuanji and Chowing joined hands and reversed the formation, tearing a crack in the formation of the Vishnu Palace. A group of warriors immediately rushed in. As soon as they came in contact, Yin Tuoyuo and Anna Siluo's faces changed. Chu Xiu had a great reputation in the East Domain, and he also had a great reputation in Jianghu. But the problem was that the reputation was only Chu Xiu's, and it had nothing to do with the forces under him. People did not even know how strong the forces under Chu Xiu were. But now, when the people of the Kunlun devil cult attacked, Yin Tuoyuo and Anna Siluo's hearts sank. Chen Qingdi's fist power was unparalleled, and Wei Shiya's devil power was overwhelming. These two had the fighting power of the martial immortal realm. How could they be unknown people? There were also Lu Fengxian, Lu Jianghe, Mei Qinglian, and the others who were in the profound understanding realm could be said to be the best, and they could even be compared to the half-step martial immortal. And within the true fire spirit refinement realm, there were still elites like Tangya and Yan Bugue. It could be said that this batch of Kunlun demon sect martial artists under Chu Xiu's command could definitely stand at the pinnacle amongst those of the same realm. They could definitely stand shoulder to shoulder with the Sanskrit sect's Shiva Palace and the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple's Life Transformation Pavilion. Chen Qingdi waved his hand at Wei Shiya and said, Old Wei, I'll leave this old man to you. I don't like to beat old people. Let me destroy the turtle shell of Vishnu Palace. Anasiro's strength was not bad, but Chen Qingdi could feel the decaying aura on his body from such a distance. Ever since he fought with Jun Wuxian, Chen Qingdi's standards had become higher. Such an opponent could not even arouse his fighting spirit. Of course, he was still interested in Indala, but he also knew that he wasn't Indala's match right now. Moreover, this battle required speed. He had to destroy the Vishnu Palace as fast as he could. He had to retreat before the Sanskrit reacted. Yin Tuoyuo pointed at Chu Xiu and said coldly, Chu Xiu, do you know that today you... Before waiting for Yin Tuoyuo to finish speaking, Chu Xiu smiled coldly and said, So much nonsense. Do you know why you can't beat Heavenly Jewel Buddha all these years? Because when Heavenly Jewel Buddha moves, it will always be more than when you move your mouth. As Chu Xiu's voice fell, the ethereal cut was already slashed out. The saber power was hidden in the void, ethereal and formless. Even with Yin Tuoyuo's current strength, he couldn't see where the saber power was. Yin Tuoyuo's eyes flashed with a strong killing intent. All right, since you've already made up your mind to die, I won't waste my breath. Compared to using words, I prefer to use my hands. Last time, I underestimated you. Also, Mu Baishuang and the others were useless and ran away so fast. This time, you and I have plenty of time to take it slow. At the moment when the ethereal cut was about to hit him, Yin Tuoyuo still couldn't find the trace of the saber. But the next moment, Yin Tuoyuo's body moved. The world-extinguishing fire burned the void, and his body directly escaped into the void. He didn't understand the laws regarding space, but this move of his was no different from a martial immortal who was proficient in space laws. The ethereal cut saber power exploded in midair. Although the scattered saber intent was powerful, it all slashed empty air. A black line of fire appeared in midair, as if the void had been torn open. But the next moment, before Yin Tuoyuo could come out of that space, Chu Xiu slashed out again. Heaven Devourer. Heaven Devourer didn't have as many changes in power as the ethereal cut, but its characteristics were even more domineering than the ethereal cut. It could even devour and dissolve the power of laws. The world-extinguishing fire could extinguish any power of laws, and Heaven Devourer could also devour the power of laws. These two weren't magical powers, but they were infinitely close to magical powers. When they collided, an extremely intense change immediately erupted, causing the waves of laws within a radius of 1,000 feet to become completely chaotic. Traces of law threads kept twisting and exploding, squeezing In Tualuo out of the space. In Tualuo snorted coldly and formed hand seals. As he did so, his entire body was covered in the world-extinguishing fire. In the end, the world-extinguishing fire enveloped his entire body and became a huge arrow that shot towards Chu Xiu. That scene was extremely familiar to Chu Xiu. Wasn't that the Triple Link City extinguishing arrow? However, In Tualuo had actually very creatively turned himself into the arrow of the Triple Link City extinguishing arrow. Using the world as a bow, he shot himself at Chu Xiu. Wherever it passed, the world-extinguishing fire would burn the laws of the void. Its power was extremely shocking. This time, without the others delaying or worrying, In Tualuo could attack without any qualms. The might he displayed was indeed stronger than before. The world-extinguishing fire that could burn the void had countless transformations. It could dissolve the power of laws, and its power was incomparably shocking. If used well, it could kill a seventh heaven martial immortal. However, last time, Chu Xiu also didn't use his full power. In Tualuo turned himself into an arrow, and the world-extinguishing fire locked onto Chu Xiu, preventing him from escaping. But the very next moment, a ray of light blossomed in Chu Xiu's hand. Cross-shaped lotus flower, Buddhist aura surging into the sky. Chu Xiu had also cultivated the world-extinguishing fire, so he naturally knew what the bane of the world-extinguishing fire was. To the world-extinguishing fire, the power of the cross-shaped lotus flower had reached a limit. The world-extinguishing fire around In Tualuo was extinguishing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Illuminated by the boundless Buddhist aura, the power was constantly dissipating, and in the end, In Tualuo's body was revealed. The enormous power sent In Tualuo flying, but the very next moment, Chu Xiu felt something was amiss. In terms of foundation and power, In Tualuo was stronger than him. After all, he was a fifth heaven martial immortal. But in the previous attack, after the world-extinguishing fire was extinguished, In Tualuo didn't even retaliate. That was a bit strange. The next moment, demonic flames and Buddhist aura blossomed around Chu Xiu's body. He pushed the invincible divine demon body to the extreme. In that instant, Chu Xiu was like an ancient demon god that had descended, controlling the two extreme powers of light and darkness. At some unknown point in time, the space around Chu Xiu had split open. Threads formed by the world-extinguishing fire wrapped around him. In Tualuo's body appeared behind him. In Tualuo had completely transformed into the world-extinguishing fire and dissipated. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes. In Tualuo seemed to have filled his body with the world-extinguishing fire, and could even swap bodies with him to the point where it was difficult to distinguish between the real and the fake. He was truly troublesome to deal with. The next moment, the threads of the world-extinguishing fire abruptly tightened, completely wrapping Chu Xiu within. But the Buddhist aura and demonic flames around Chu Xiu's body surged. The powerful power shattered the threads formed by the world-extinguishing fire, causing a series of loud rumbles. This was only because Chu Xiu's reaction was fast. Also, the invincible divine demon body's defense was truly astonishing. If it were anyone else, they would have likely been heavily injured by that attack. What a tough body. In Tualuo licked his lips. Killing intent and fighting spirit were simply about to overflow from his eyes. It had been a very long time since he had encountered an opponent as difficult to deal with as Chu Xiu. He was basically fearless against cultivators of the same level. In fact, only cultivators 1 or 2 levels higher than him were worthy of being his enemy. But now Chu Xiu, a martial artist who was 2 heavens weaker than him, could actually make him feel that he was difficult to deal with. In Tualuo was not angry. He only felt that it was very novel and he really wanted to kill him. The next moment, In Tualuo suddenly began to dance, performing a strange and seductive dance. In Tualuo's appearance was extremely handsome and seductive to begin with. It was even to the extent that it was difficult to distinguish his gender. His figure was also enchanting and slender. Such a seductive dance performed by him actually gave off a soul-stirring sense of beauty. But Chu Xiu immediately felt that something was wrong. He smelled a scent from that dance, a scent of death and destruction. Before he could do anything, In Tualuo's dance became faster and faster. At a glance, it was as if he had grown 8 arms. The world-extinguishing fire was like lotus petals that began to fall as he danced. The world began to collapse. With Tualuo at the center, the world began to collapse. Space was torn apart, time was distorted, and even the rules vanished. Everything seemed like the end of the world. This was the inherited mystique of Shiva Temple, the dance of world annihilation. Legend had it that when god Shiva destroyed the world, he had performed this dance, and the world was being destroyed under his dance. Chu Xiu was within the range of the collapse. He could not borrow any essence chi or even the power of rules. The next moment, Chu Xiu's figure suddenly expanded, turning into a giant that was thousands of feet tall. He supported the world that was about to be destroyed. Tualuo could destroy the world, so he could split open the sky. As Chu Xiu used the law embodiment of heaven and earth, his huge body directly tore apart the world that was about to be destroyed, causing the power of destruction to spread out to the outside world. The mystique of the dance of world annihilation was indeed extremely overbearing. It could destroy all existences in a space, including the power of rules. But at the same time, the range of such an overbearing mystique was also not large. It only covered an area of several hundred feet. As Chu Xiu forcibly opened up the world, that power spread out. Tualuo's dance became faster and faster. His face was already pale, and in the end he could only stop dancing. If this continued, he did not know if Chu Xiu would die, but he would definitely not be able to hold on. Chapter 1335. The martial artists of Shiva Hall were the most combative, and Indra was even more so. He had met many opponents in his life, many from the heavenly Luo treasure temple, and many from the other 3 regions, but he was the first to meet someone as wild as Chu Xiu. He had never expected that Chu Xiu could use such a funny method of not attacking directly to force him to stop the dance of destruction. At this time, Chu Xiu also stopped the state of the law embodiment of heaven and earth, shook his head and said, "The power is not bad, but it's a pity that the variations are not enough. Your Sanskrit techniques are not bad on their own, but it's a pity that when these techniques of the same attribute are put together, they seem even more rigid." Indra's eyes showed a hint of anger. "Are you worthy to comment on my Sanskrit techniques? I'll be worthy if I kill you." Chu Xiu formed a seal with his hand, and the 6 paths Saha miraculous light wheels appeared, directly enveloping Indra. Indra's power was too easy to see through. Chu Xiu had only exchanged blows with him twice, and he had already figured out his martial path. He had more power but not enough variations. This was not Chu Xiu mocking him, but the truth. The power of the 6 paths of reincarnation reached out one after another. The power of celestial being turned into vast and boundless divine might, directly suppressing him on the spot. The power of the hungry ghost Tao devoured everything. Even the fire of destruction was also devoured, and the strange power of the human Tao was also grinding his body. Most importantly, the 6 paths of reincarnation seemed real and illusory at the same time, also affecting his primordial spirit. This technique had already been used by Chu Xiu previously, and at that time, it had already left a very deep impression on Indra. So, after returning, Tualuo had been thinking about how to break Chu Xiu's 6 Saha wondrous splendor wheel. However, after thinking for a month, Indra sadly discovered that in terms of pure martial techniques, he actually could not break this technique. Because from a certain point of view, the 6 paths of Saha splendor wheel could be considered a perfect cultivation technique. The power of the 6 paths reincarnation was different from each other, but it was a combination of strength and softness. The 6 paths reincarnation formed a perfect seal without any loopholes. Furthermore, the power of the 6 paths of samsara was targeted at the physical body. At the same time, there was also a power targeting the Yuan Shen, making it impossible to fight back. There was no way to find a way out. However, nothing in the world was perfect. Tualuo pondered for a long time, and finally understood that there was only one way to break Chu Xiu's 6 paths of Saha samsara wheel. That was to use absolute power to break through the cycle of reincarnation. Tualuo's sleeves suddenly exploded, revealing his arms that were covered in tattoos. If one looked closely, they would discover that one side of his arms was engraved with a storm, while the other side was engraved with lightning. As his arms danced, endless storms and lightning swept across the sky, tearing everything apart and annihilating everything. It was another apocalyptic scene. This was also the Shiva temple's legacy spell, Dance of Storms. It was said that among the powers that Shiva controlled were storms and lightning. When the world was about to be destroyed, wind, rain, lightning, and lightning would be unleashed. This time, the Dance of Storms was not as powerful as the Dance of World Destruction, but its range was extremely wide. It directly drowned out the power of the 6 paths of samsara. However, after using the Dance of Storms, Intuayuo's face was already a bit pale. Although his face was also very pale before, it wasn't as pale as it was now, as if he was sick. Chu Xiu's eyes narrowed. 2 spells. Intuayuo had already used 2 spells of the Shiva temple's legacy spell. Right now, his power should be almost at the limit, right? Although Chu Xiu still had the clear sky reflecting shadow, he didn't plan to use it. He also used 2 spells, but because the cross-shaped lotus seal's consumption was small, his consumption was actually not as great as Intuayuo's. This was the West region, the territory of Sanskrit. It was still unknown how the battle between Sanskrit and Heaven Luo Treasure Buddha was going. Therefore, Chu Xiu wouldn't risk his life in a situation like this. Besides, he didn't need to risk his life to deal with Intuayuo, who had already been exhausted to the limit. Chu Xiu made the cross-shaped lotus seal again. A huge Buddhist lotus bloomed, and golden Buddhist light enveloped Intuayuo's entire body. A spell like the cross-shaped lotus seal was extremely destructive to Intuayuo. It wasn't inferior to Heaven Luo Treasure Buddha's pure lotus Buddhist light. Even if Intuayuo tore through space with the fire of destruction and escaped into space, he was still blasted out by the cross-shaped lotus seal's power. Again and again, Chu Xiu's 3 cross-shaped lotus seals landed, causing Intuayuo to vomit blood. His face was filled with shock and disbelief. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. How many times had Chu Xiu used a spell? 5 times? 6 times? Divine abilities were not martial skills. To use divine abilities so many times in succession, the exhaustion of Chu Xiu's power would be sufficient to drain a 5th heaven martial immortal dry. Thus, how could Chu Xiu possibly use divine abilities of that level in succession? He was simply using a spell like a martial technique. That was absolutely impossible. On the other side, the palace master of the Lotus Divine Palace, Enrich, was also in a miserable state. He was suppressed by Wei Shuya to the point where he couldn't even lift his head. Although he had the cultivation of a 3rd heaven martial immortal, he was actually very old. He couldn't even unleash 80% of his peak strength. Although Wei Shuya looked old, that was because he had always maintained his appearance when he was in the true fire spirit refinement realm. When he broke through to the profound understanding realm, Wei Shuya had already gained a portion of his lifespan. Then he stepped into the martial immortal realm and gained another portion of his lifespan. Therefore, if Wei Shuya wanted to, he could completely restore his appearance when he was 30 or 40 years old. He could become that incomparably handsome jade-face heavenly demon of the past. Unfortunately, Wei Shuya said he was used to maintaining his current appearance and was unwilling to change back no matter what. In the entire Kunlun devil cult, no one had ever seen Wei Shuya's true appearance, including Chu Wuji, who had followed him since the beginning. Therefore, everyone in the Kunlun devil cult was curious about Wei Shuya's appearance when he was young. It was not a problem for a 1st heaven martial immortal in his prime to fight against an old 3rd heaven martial immortal. From the 1st heaven to the 3rd heaven, it was only a period of stabilizing one's realm. There wouldn't be a qualitative leap in strength. At that moment, when Anasiro saw Intua being suppressed by Chu Xiu to such a state, he couldn't help but roar furiously. Intua, are you an idiot? If you can't defeat him, then what are you fighting for? Run. Run. Run and find Hall Master Renaga and Hall Master Yenma. Tell them everything that happened here. Wei Shuya said coldly, You're still worried about him? You should worry about yourself first. While Anasiro was distracted, a thin line of fire had appeared 3 inches away from his neck. Any power, including the power of rules, was like nothingness in front of that thin line of fire. It was easily cut apart. The next moment, the line of fire retracted. Anasiro's eyes widened, but he never closed them again, because his head had been completely cut off by that line of fire. At that moment, Anasiro's warning and his death didn't affect Intua at all, because his eyes were bloodshot. Run! Intua will never run. How can the Vice Master of Shiva Hall run? If I run, even if I step into the netherworld, how can I face the great god Shiva? I haven't lost yet. As Intua spat out his last words, all the world annihilation flames on his body gathered between his eyebrows. They took the shape of a small blade. It was a small blade formed completely from the purest world annihilation flames. It started cutting at his eyebrows, drawing a line of blood. But no blood flowed out of the line. Instead, a vertical eye appeared. A vertical eye formed completely from world annihilation flames. Shiva's third eye. The third eye that released world annihilation flames and completely destroyed the world. This was something Chushio didn't expect. He also didn't expect Intua to have a third theurgy. Most martial immortals only mastered one theurgy. Those who could master two were rare. At Intua's realm, being able to master two theurgies was worthy of his strength. But mastering three was completely unexpected. The moment Shiva's third eye appeared, Chushio felt an extreme sense of danger. He didn't even have time to use Clear Sky Illuminating Shadow. Clear Sky Illuminating Shadow only destroyed Intua's body, but his theurgy had already taken form. Even if he killed Intua, it would be useless. Right at this moment, the third eye instantly emitted countless world annihilation flames. Everywhere it passed, it engulfed and drowned everything, leaving only an empty hole. An empty hole without any power or laws. This was the true world annihilation. At this moment, Chushio gathered all the demonic energy around him. The power of rules appeared faintly in the void, condensing the demonic energy. With the demonic path of creation, he evolved the boundless primitive demon cave. That was the true primitive demon cave. Demonic energy filled it, as if all the power of Een in the world was condensed within it. But the strangest thing was that from the primitive demon cave, endless world annihilation flames also emerged. The two world annihilation flames collided fiercely in the primitive demon cave. They fused together and began to grow. In the end, they even filled the entire primitive demon cave. Intua's face was as pale as paper. He laughed and said, "World annihilation flames against world annihilation flames? Chushio, have you lost your mind? How can your world annihilation flames compete with the world annihilation flames of great god Shiva's third eye?" Chushio didn't speak. Instead, he used all his strength to erupt with the same world annihilation flames. Just as the world annihilation flames were about to explode the primitive demon cave, the world annihilation flames suddenly changed. A dim light appeared within the world annihilation flames. Finally, like a single spark setting a prairie ablaze, it became more and more numerous. Finally, the pitch-black world annihilation flames were dyed pure white, illuminating the entire primitive demon cave. Within the dark demonic energy, black and white colors intertwined. An emerald green sprout suddenly emerged from the void. In the next moment, Shiva's third eye on Intua's forehead exploded. Chapter 1336. The sliver of life force born from the boundless destruction was like the final straw, crushing Intualuo. Shiva's third eye shattered. Blood even flowed from his eyes. Yet he continued to mutter, "Impossible. Absolutely impossible." Chushio's complexion was a bit pale. But with a wave of his hand, the surging world annihilation flames in the primordial demon cave dispersed. Only an emerald sprout that truly existed was left, and it fell into his hand. Creation. At this moment, Chushio seemed to truly understand the meaning of the word creation. The emerald sprout was some unknown plant. Perhaps it was nothing, and only represented the life force of creation. In an instant it fused into Chushio's hand. Then Chushio suddenly felt the source energy of Yin and Yang in his body tremble slightly. It was a very, very faint tremble, much fainter than when they were fusing. But in an instant, all of Chushio's exhaustion was restored. His complexion became incomparably rosy. That power flowed through his limbs and bones. Although it didn't allow Chushio to reach the 4th level of martial immortal, it allowed him to comprehend something. Looking at Intualuo, Chu Xiu wasn't in a hurry to kill him. After all, it was all thanks to him that he was able to comprehend something in the end. Chu Xiu only lightly shook his head and said, "Impossible? There is nothing in this world that is impossible. It is just that you are too extreme. Everything in the world is in balance with yin and yang. It is a cycle in itself. How can there be anything that can only be destroyed? The world annihilation flames can only be created after the world is destroyed. In that extreme darkness, what is hidden is the true life force of creation. Yet you have never discovered it, or rather, you don't want to discover it. Yin Tuoyuo, you have walked the wrong path from the very start. You can become a martial immortal, but you cannot reach the peak." Yin Tuoyuo hoarsely laughed and said, "I'm wrong? I'm not wrong. How could I be wrong? Chu Xiu, you have not won because you cannot kill me." As Yin Tuoyuo spoke, the last bit of power around him condensed into a world-destroying fire. But it was ignited on his own body. With a strange wild laugh, Yin Tuoyuo burned himself into a pile of ash in an instant. Chu Xiu was stunned. Yin Tuoyuo would rather commit suicide in front of him than admit that he had lost. He was really stubborn, or rather, paranoid. Looking at the pile of ashes on the ground, Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "Turning into spring mud protects the flowers even more. If you burned yourself to ashes with the world-extinguishing fire, the grass here would definitely grow extremely well after a few months. Wasn't this also a kind of reincarnation? Actually, you already know the answer, you just don't want to believe it." Stubborn people would walk further and faster, but at the same time, if stubborn people walked on the wrong path, they would also die a more miserable death. After the two martial immortals in the Vishnu Divine Palace were killed, the rest of the warriors couldn't even resist, and fled while crying. "Hurry up and kill them, but don't chase too closely. Others, go into the Vishnu Divine Palace, and take away everything that can be taken away." This was the Vishnu Divine Palace, one of the three main divine palaces of Sanskrit. There must be countless treasures in it. This time, Chu Xiu had broken through the Vishnu Divine Palace. Just the resources that he had obtained were enough for him to make a lot of money. Of course, what Chu Xiu wanted the most now was not these things, but the origin. However, Chu Xiu and the others had searched all over the Vishnu Divine Palace, and found many secret treasures. Even the treasure chamber in the deepest part of the Vishnu Divine Palace was broken by Master Yuanji and Chao Shen, but there was still no origin in it. Chu Xiu frowned. Could it be that the information of the fat man Sikong Tam was wrong? The yang origin of the Dalyu Ocean was not in the Vishnu Divine Palace of Sanskrit? There are no survivors left in the Vishnu Divine Palace? Lu Jiang, he carried a warrior with a mustache, who was at the mysterious heaven and earth realm, and said, "There is only one left. Most of the people in the Vishnu Divine Palace are not afraid of death. Only this guy is afraid of death and surrendered." That warrior looked at Lu Jiang he with a trace of grievance. "If I didn't surrender, you killed me. I surrendered, but you said that I was afraid of death. Was I not a human? What is your position in the Sanskrit?" Chu Xiu asked in a deep voice. That middle-aged man quickly said, "I am Ji Xinlua, the master of the illusionary heavenly palace." Chu Xiu slightly raised his eyebrows. He seemed to have a predestined relationship with the people of the illusionary heavenly palace. The warrior that he had met this time was also from the illusionary heavenly palace. "Do you know where the origin of the Vishnu Divine Palace is?" Ji Xinlua looked confused. "Origin? What origin?" Lu Jiang he snorted coldly, and gathered his blood and qi in his hand. "Boy, be honest. If you don't tell the truth, I have 10,000 ways to make you beg for death." Ji Xinlua quickly said, "I really don't know. I have been in the Sanskrit for so many years, but I have never heard of the word origin." Chu Xiu waved his hand, signaling Lu Jiang he not to make a move. He might really not know. With the cultivation of the mysterious heaven and earth realm, and the fact that he was the master of a celestial palace, he was already a big shot in the outside world. But obviously in the Sanskrit he should not be able to get in touch with the real secrets of the Sanskrit. So Chu Xiu changed his words and described the general shape of the origin to Ji Xinlua. Ji Xinlua suddenly understood. "So you are talking about the creation divine object?" "Creation divine object?" Ji Xinlua nodded his head and said, Anyway, that's what the previous Lord of Vishnu Palace told us. This thing was left by the god of creation, and only the 3 gods of Sanskrit can control it. Now we have obtained a part of it, but we can't use its power. And if we don't use it well, even the martial immortals can't resist its power. For so many years, there have been 5 martial immortals in the Vishnu Palace who died because of researching the creation divine object, and the rest of the mysterious heaven and earth realm and true fire realm are countless. Then where is the creation divine object now? Ji Xinlua carefully answered. In the headquarter of the Sanskrit. What? Why is it in the headquarter of the Sanskrit? Ji Xinlua said, previously, Master Shingala was killed by you, and the Vishnu Palace didn't have a master, so they felt that the creation divine object was not safe in the Vishnu Palace, so they moved it to the headquarter of the Sanskrit. Chu Xiu furrowed his brows slightly. He had neglected this point. Under the premise that the origin was so precious, the Vishnu Palace didn't even have a master. How could they still guarantee the safety of the origin? Then in the Vishnu Palace, did you move the research records of the creation divine object to the headquarter of the Sanskrit? Ji Xinlua said, no. Chu Xiu waved his hand and said, find out all the research records of the creation divine object in the Sanskrit, and any secret records, and I can spare your life. Of course, you won't be able to go back to the Sanskrit. Ji Xinlua immediately heaved a sigh of relief. But to be honest, he didn't want to go back to the Sanskrit. Since he was afraid of death, he had already surrendered, and also sold out so many secrets of the Sanskrit. If he went back to the Sanskrit now, once he was discovered, thousands of tortures would be waiting for him. Ji Xinlua ran to find those research records. At this time, Chu Xiu suddenly thought of something. He said to the devil in his heart, didn't you want to use a martial immortal to refine a body? There is one here. Although In Tuoyuo had already turned into ashes, and Asiluo was killed by Wei Shuya. Only his head was missing, but his body was still intact. The devil in his heart said with slight disdain, he's too old. TSK, why do you have so many requirements? Even if you refine a body with a martial immortal, you will only be able to unleash the strength of the profound understanding realm. But your upper limit will be martial immortal. As long as you can rely on yourself to comprehend the power of rules, it will be easier for you to reach the martial immortal realm compared to other cultivators. The devil in his heart nodded and said, that's fine. Tell me, what do you want me to help you with? Chu Xiu was startled. How do you know what I want you to do? The devil in his heart sneered. I've stayed in your mind for so long. Do you think I don't know your personality? People are the most complicated things, and you, Chu Xiu, are more complicated than most people. Based on my understanding of you, if you didn't want me to do something, you definitely wouldn't be in such a hurry to help me reconstruct my body. Chu Xiu shook his head. No matter what, we've known each other for so many years. I didn't expect you to think of me in such a way. You truly disappoint me. However, Chu Xiu immediately changed his tone. However, I do have a small favor that I want you to help me with. The devil in his heart said indifferently. Go ahead, I'm not a human. Why are you trying to scheme against me? Humans have emotions. However, to the current devil in his heart, he did not have any emotions. He would only use the most callous of gains and losses to calculate everything. He was following Chu Xiu. Ever since he left the primitive demon cave, Chu Xiu could be said to be his master. Now even if Chu Xiu helped him reconstruct his body and gave him his freedom, the most beneficial thing for him was to follow Chu Xiu. Therefore he didn't need to worry about so many things. Based on his understanding of Chu Xiu, as long as he didn't betray Chu Xiu, he would never treat him badly. As for himself, he didn't have any reason to betray Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu pointed at Ji Xinlua and said, this guy can't return to the Sanskrit sect in the future. So what I want you to do is very simple. After you reconstruct your body, you copy his memory. I'll make my body look like him. You'll pretend to be a survivor and escape to the Sanskrit sect. From then on, you'll be the lord of the Sanskrit sect's Vishnu Palace. The devil nodded and said, I understand. You want me to be a spy. However, this guy is too ugly. Moreover, you've used this trick several times. Do you still need to use it? Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, it doesn't matter if he's ugly. I'll help you change your appearance after this. Also, it doesn't matter if the trick is new or old as long as it works. What's more useful than infiltrating the enemy? Moreover, this isn't a simple spy. The Sanskrit sect might suspect an outsider, but they won't suspect their own people. Chapter 1337. Inside the Vishnu temple, there were corpses of Vishnu temple warriors all around. In this environment, Chushio used the boundless devil energy to wrap Anasiro's body. The sharp devil energy was like a death by 1,000 cuts, squeezing out all the blood in the body. Coupled with the surrounding environment, Chushio at this moment was like a perverted murderer. But this was a necessary step. Chushio had no other choice. When the blood was condensed, the boundless devil energy flowed into the blood. In an instant, the blood seemed to be alive, constantly twisting. The power of creation demonic path was extremely magical. Previously, Chushio had always treated creation demonic path as a kind cultivation method to cultivate. Even the creation heavenly devil scripture that Qi Lianhai gave to Chushio was actually the same. Although Chushio's understanding of creation demonic path had deepened, in fact it was still on the surface. The true creation demonic path was one of the great ways that could reach directly to the origin of demonic path. Creation yin and yang were originally interconnected existences. The extremely evil devil energy at this moment was giving new life to the blood, forming a new human form. Finally, the outline slowly emerged. Unexpectedly was no different from Ji Xinlua, only the aura was a little different. This was not important. After the devil read the memory of the other, with the ability of the devil, it could naturally simulate the other's temperament, demeanor, and other things. Touching his chin, Chushio randomly took out a dead person's clothes and put it on. Otherwise it would be too painful to look at. The power of the primordial spirit wrapped the body, and Chushio directly passed the devil over. In an instant, the body seemed to have essence, chi, and spirit, and became agile. The devil moved its body a little awkwardly. In the beginning, it was still a little awkward, but after a few breaths, it had already adapted. The devil had devoured the memories of countless warriors. Although this was the first time it controlled a human body, it was still not a problem. After a while, Ji Xinlua came back with a pile of things. After seeing the devil, he was stunned, and his face was full of confusion. Chushio pointed at Xinmo and said, "From today onwards, he will act on your behalf in the Sanskrit sect, so you don't have to worry about your betrayal being discovered. Calm your mind and hand over your memories to him. You are also the palace master of the illusionary Heaven Royal Palace. You should know what to do." Ji Xinlua nodded and carefully opened up his mind, handing over all his memories to the heart demon. Chushio glanced at the surroundings and asked, "Have you already taken everything?" Lu Jianghe chuckled and said, "I'm good at this. I promise I won't leave a single hair for the Sanskrit." Before joining the Kunlun devil cult, Lu Jianghe used to be a pirate, which he was very good at. Chushio nodded and said in a deep voice, "Then let's all withdraw lest the night is fraught with dreams." With a wave of his hand, Chushio immediately led everyone away. Before leaving, he also crushed the communication array disk that he had given to Tian Luo Treasure Buddha to inform them that his side was done. After waiting for Chushio's side to leave, Xinmo, or rather Ji Xinlua, stretched his limbs, chuckled twice, and walked towards the west. From now on he was the palace master of the illusionary Heaven Royal Palace, Ji Xinlua. In the western battlefield, the Sanskrit sect and Tian Luo Treasure Buddha were fighting. The entire battlefield was filled with the sound of fighting, and the power of laws had been completely disrupted. The number of people on both sides was actually about the same, but the Sanskrit sect was already at a disadvantage. Of course, it was not too much of a disadvantage. The Sanskrit sect's warriors knew that this time, they were at a disadvantage, so they went crazy and fought with all their might. But what made the Sanskrit sect's warriors puzzled was that this time, the Tian Luo Treasure Buddha did not seem to fight seriously. Instead, they always gave in when facing the Sanskrit sect's warriors, which made the Sanskrit sect's warriors somewhat puzzled. When it came to willpower, the Tian Luo Treasure Buddha was not inferior to the Sanskrit sects, especially these monks of the Tian Luo Treasure Buddha. Each of them was very stubborn, So how could they be afraid of death at this time? However, before they could figure out what was going on, Zen Master Jishan suddenly sensed something. He chanted the name of Buddha in a loud and clear voice, which instantly spread across the entire battlefield. Hearing this Buddha's name, all the warriors of the Tianluo treasure Buddha began to retreat in an instant, and left the battlefield in an orderly manner. The Sanskrit sect was originally at a disadvantage, so naturally, they would not chase after them at this time. But they were all confused, not knowing what the Tianluo treasure Buddha was doing. Half of the battle, and under the situation where they had the advantage, they actually stopped fighting. What the hell was going on? After confirming that the Tianluo treasure Buddha had left, Yanma's appearance changed from that of a handsome young man back to that of a short old man. He said in a hoarse voice, "What is the intention of the Tianluo treasure Buddha? Both sides have retreated without any large-scale casualties. Are they playing around?" Renaja frowned and said, "Who knows what they are thinking, but there is something wrong with this matter. The Tianluo treasure Buddha mobilized so many people, and put in so much effort to attack the Sanskrit sect, but in the end, they retreated halfway? There is definitely something wrong with this." Although Renaja felt that there was something wrong, he could not tell what exactly it was. The Sanskrit sect also suffered some casualties, so Renaja hurriedly ordered the people to treat the injured warriors. At this moment, a cultivator ran over, gasping for breath, and said in a sorrowful voice, "Hall Master, Vishnu Temple is gone." Renaja's expression immediately changed. "What did you say? What happened to Vishnu Temple?" The warrior pointed to the back and said, "Vishnu Temple was destroyed. Only Palace Master Ji Shinluo managed to escape, but he is already heavily injured." Renaja immediately walked to the back and saw Ji Shinluo, who was lying there with a pale face, as if he had used up all his energy. Seeing Renaja, Ji Shinluo said in a sad voice, "Temple Master, we were tricked. The Tianluo treasure Buddha colluded with Chu Xiu of the Eastern Domain. In this battle, the Tianluo treasure Buddha was just a prelude, a bait. Chu Xiu crossed 100,000 mountains and ambushed the Sanskrit sect. Lord Yindra died in battle. The old palace master Anasiro also died in battle. Everyone died. I was almost killed as well. I used all my strength to confuse the pursuers, creating an illusion of fake death, and escaped. Temple Master, you have to take revenge for our Vishnu temple." Heart Demon's last cry was like a cuckoo crying blood, extremely mournful. All kinds of hatred, unwillingness, fear, and other emotions were completely integrated into it. It could be said to be perfect and flawless. Actually, if it was a spy, Heart Demon was the most suitable one. Because he had no emotions, he could rely on the martial artist's memories that he had devoured to simulate other emotions. It could be said to be perfect and flawless. When he shouted the word revenge, Heart Demon seemed to have used up the last bit of his energy, and completely fainted. For someone like him who could control mental energy at will, pretending to faint was not too difficult. Renaja and Yenemo did not speak at this time, but the aura around them was like a storm. Even the power of rules was faintly visible in the void, making it so that no one dared to come within 100 feet of them. Chu Xiu. The entire battlefield was instantly filled with thunder, the anger of martial immortals stirring the heavens and the earth. When the battle in the Western Domain ended, the entire Daoyu Ocean was instantly in an uproar. Actually, the battle between the Sanskrit sect and the Tianluo treasure Buddha was not a big deal. After all, they would have such a battle every once in a while. But in the past tens of thousands of years, the Sanskrit sect had never lost so badly. One of their halls had actually been destroyed. Moreover, it was not the Tianluo treasure Buddha who had destroyed one of the 3 halls of the Sanskrit sect, but Chu Xiu. From this moment onwards, perhaps Chu Xiu's name could truly be said to have shaken the entire Daoyu Ocean, to the point where everyone knew him. And strictly speaking, the destruction of the Vishnu temple from the very beginning had something to do with Chu Xiu. If Chu Xiu had not killed Xian Jialua in the exalted divine palace and broken the balance of power in the Western Domain, the Tianluo treasure Buddha would not have thought of attacking the Sanskrit sect. It could be said that Chu Xiu alone had forcefully weakened the Sanskrit sect's strength by a third. In a secret realm in the 100,000 mountains of the southern domain, this was the secret realm of the divine general Zhenlong, and the venerable Gu Yu's lineage. The two sects had united and cultivated here. When Feng Baidu and Su Tianya read the news from the outside world, they looked at each other and were speechless, but there was a trace of trepidation in their hearts. Chu Xiu had actually reached such a level? The hatred of killing his disciple was absolutely irreconcilable. But now, they no longer had the courage to attack Chu Xiu alone. Feng Baidu let out a long sigh and looked at Long Longer and Luo Feiheng, who were still cultivating in the secret realm. He said in a deep voice, Chu Xiu is already unstoppable. Even though he has submitted to the Imperial Sky Pavilion now, in reality, he is even more terrifying than the Imperial Sky Pavilion. From now on, you and I should not leave the secret realm for the time being. If you don't have absolute confidence, don't ever attack Chu Xiu. Su Tianya nodded and said, I'm not an idiot. At this time, of course, I won't provoke Chu Xiu. Feng Baidu sighed and said, where there's life, there's hope. We're fortunate to have two extremely talented disciples, so we can continue to pass on our legacy. As for Sword Venerable Ling Tian's lineage, there's still no movement until now. At this moment, Shengju Yuan was still in the World Sword Sect. When he, Mu Baishuang, and the other martial immortals of the World Sword Sect saw the news from the West region, they were also silent. Destroy the Vishnu Palace, one of the Sanskrit's three main palaces? Even when he was at his peak, he had never thought of such a thing, nor did he dare to think about it. At this moment, Shengju Yuan suddenly said, how about giving Feng Qixiao to me? I'm willing to exchange the Ling Tian sword technique for him. My cultivation base has reached its limit in this life, and it's basically impossible for me to step into the eighth heaven. If I want to take revenge, I can only find a worthy successor. Feng Qixiao's future is limitless. When Mu Baishuang thought of the absurd things that Feng Qixiao had done in the World Sword Sect recently, he could not help but raise his eyebrows. However, he still shook his head and said, the disciples of the World Sword Sect cannot give up, and will not give up. Brother Sheng, you're too stubborn. You should let it go. Chapter 1338. The Destruction of the Vishnu Palace, one of the three great palaces of Sanskrit, by Chu Xiu, mainly alarmed those who had relations with Chu Xiu, of course, mainly because they had enmity with him. As for those who didn't have a grudge against him, they were also secretly investigating and being vigilant. The Daoyuotian people were already in such chaos before the era of great strife had even arrived. What would the Daoyuotian people be like when the era of great strife really arrived? At this moment, in the extreme north, in the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, the stargazing pavilion, was the secluded cultivation ground of Xing He's loose cultivator. Meng Xinghe sat at the highest point of the stargazing pavilion. There was a chessboard in front of him, but there was no opponent. He was actually playing against himself. At this time, a white-robed warrior walked to the stargazing pavilion, lowered his head, and said in a deep voice, Your Excellency, the result of the war in the western region has come out. Vishnu Palace, one of the three main palaces of Sanskrit, has been destroyed, but the real person who did it was not Tian Luo Buddha, but Chu Xiu. I don't know when he joined hands with the treasure temple of Heavenly Luo. They took a detour around the 100,000 mountains and launched a sneak attack when the treasure temple of Heavenly Luo attracted the attention of the Brahmin sect. Meng Xinghe paused for a moment and put down a chess piece. He still had that gentle smile on his face. Interesting. The Heavenly Luo Temple, which has always been open and aboveboard, actually teamed up with Chu Xiu, who has a bad reputation. And the Sanskrit sect, which has always liked to use sinister means, actually fell into such a terrible trap. Interesting. That martial artist said in a low voice. Lord, with such a thing happening, I'm afraid the pugilistic world will be shaken for a while. Will our Galaxy Martial Academy's plan be carried out normally? Meng Xinghe waved his hand and said, There's no need to delay. Even if Chu Xiu exterminated the Sanskrit religion, the Starry River Martial Institute still needs to be established. How many prime sovereigns have agreed so far? The martial artist's expression was somewhat ugly as he said, Only 3 people agreed. They didn't know how to appreciate favors. My lord, you're willing to lead them to establish the Starry River Martial Academy to give our Guzun lineage a chance of survival and fortune in this era of great battles. In the end, they are still worried about their own little thoughts. I don't think many of them will be able to pass on to the next generation. They will all be cut off. Meng Xinghe smiled and waved his hand. Everyone has their own fate. We naturally can't force them if they don't want to. They will understand my painstaking efforts. There is no need for them to make a choice now. Just carry out the plan as usual. The martial artist walked down, and Meng Xinghe looked up at the sky. This was the highest mountain peak in the extreme north, and it could be said to be the closest place to heaven and earth. Martial immortals. Martial immortals. Martial immortals. Although they were known as immortals, they were still mortals. Mortals that would grow old, fall sick, and die. They were mortals that were trapped in this world. In the Milky Way, above the 9 heavens, were there really immortals who could not die? Southern barbarian land. After Chu Xiu returned with his men, he immediately started to count the spoils. The commotion in the Jianghu had nothing to do with him anymore. In any case, he had achieved his goal. As for the Brahmin sect, they were definitely going to suffer. In the absence of the sect master, the Brahmin sect was originally unwilling to make a move. Now that the Vishnu temple was destroyed by Chu Xiu, it was even more impossible for the Brahmin sect to make a move. Otherwise, the heavenly Luo pagoda would teach the Brahmin sect a lesson, and let them know that it was necessary to use thunderous means to destroy the heretics. Moreover, after he destroyed one of the Brahmin sect's temples, it would also serve as a deterrent. Therefore, whether it was the people of the Southern Territory or the group of prime venerables, they would probably not cause trouble for him during this period of time. This would give Chu Xiu a period of stable development. The first thing Chu Xiu did was to take out the various records of the Brahmin sect about the origin, and prepare to study it first. Although he did not get the origin, at least he knew where it was. According to Ji Xinlua, these records of the Brahmin sect were studied at the cost of the lives of several martial immortals and countless Brahmin sect experts. As long as he could borrow a trace of the origin, Chu Xiu's strength would skyrocket. But when he opened the records, Chu Xiu found that he could not understand them. The Brahmin sect's records were naturally written in those obscure Sanskrit. Fortunately, Chu Xiu brought Ji Xinlua back. After asking someone to call Ji Xinlua still had a nervous expression on his face. He did not know whether Chu Xiu would kill him to silence him or not. But he did not expect that the first thing Chu Xiu called him to do was to ask him to be a translator. After throwing the records to Ji Xinlua, Chu Xiu asked, "How much do you know about the creation divine artifact of your Brahmin sect?" Ji Xinlua shook his head cautiously and said, "Almost nothing. I stepped into the mysterious heaven and earth realm less than a year ago, and took over the position of the palace master of the Illusion Sky Palace. Therefore, I know nothing about the secrets of the Brahmin sect. Moreover, although most of the palaces of the Vishnu Palace are not the main fighting palaces, the Illusion Sky Palace is one of the main fighting palaces of the Vishnu Palace." Almost all the previous palace masters did not participate in the research of this thing. Chu Xiu nodded and did not continue to ask. He just asked Ji Xinlua to translate these records. He was not afraid that Ji Xinlua would deliberately do something. One reason was that the other party was scared out of his wits and did not dare to do so. The second reason was that Chu Xiu's realm was much higher than Ji Xinlua's. If the other party deliberately did something, even if Chu Xiu did not understand this thing, he would still be able to see it. After Ji Xinlua finished translating these things, Chu Xiu also asked Ji Xinlua to translate all the ancient books he got from the Brahmin sect. Among them, there were some cultivation methods that his subordinates could use as reference if they wanted to practice. In the secret room, Chu Xiu looked through the records left by the Brahmin sect. He suddenly realized that he had underestimated these Daluotian sections. He assumed that the sects from the absolute celestial plane did not have much understanding towards the essence. However, the truth was that back in the lower realm, the sects from the absolute celestial plane had already noticed the existence of the essence. Their understanding towards the essence was definitely much greater than Dugu Weiwa's. At the very least, it was much greater than Dugu Weiwa back in the lower realm. However, at that time, most of the absolute celestial experts only had a smattering of knowledge about the existence of essence. All they knew was that essence contained extremely great power, which was why they sealed it in the formation. After entering the Daluotian world, the Brahmin sect and the heavenly Luo Buddha began to compete for the origin. When the Brahmin sect officially got the origin, although it was sealed by the heavenly Luo Buddha, after all, it fell into their hands, so they could study it carefully. According to the records of the Brahmin sect, the existence of the origin was actually the heaven and earth itself. In the end, any top martial arts sect would evolve the martial way into the heavenly way, and the Brahmin sect was no exception. In the eyes of the Brahmin sect, the beginning of the world was chaos, divided into yin and yang. And this origin was a kind of imprint left behind after the creation of a world. It was formed by the two original forces left in the chaos at the beginning of the world. Therefore, the origin was a form of the heaven and earth itself. And the Brahmin sect called it the divine creation object, which was very appropriate. After so many years of research and experiments, the Brahmin sect finally came to a conclusion after paying the price of countless lives. The origin could not be refined, nor could it be controlled, and it was not even possible to borrow a trace of its power. There was only one way to use the power of the origin, and that was to find a way to get closer to the heaven and earth and comprehend the power of the origin itself. Only then could one passively stimulate the power of the origin and cause it to erupt with power. That was the power that was released inadvertently, just like the power that was released when the two origin fused in Chushio's body. It was simply impossible to control. However, the Sanskrit sect had created a secret method to adjust one's own power. In an instant, one's power could be adjusted to an extreme yin or extreme yang state. This way, one could withstand a portion of the origin power. At least it could slightly affect the power of the origin, and not simply cause it to erupt, and then use it to commit suicide. However, the Brahmin sect had not experimented with this method, because the origin of the Brahmin sect was sealed by the heavenly Luo treasure Buddha, so they did not dare to touch it. If they moved lightly, they would not be able to break the seal on the origin, but if they moved heavily, it would cause the power of the origin to erupt violently, and that power would be enough to destroy the entire Vishnu palace. Therefore, the warriors of the Vishnu palace completely relied on their own deduction to create this secret method, but they never had the opportunity to use it, so they did not know whether it was useful or not. Chushio narrowed his eyes. He suddenly wanted to give it a try. It was not that Chushio was courting death, but recently his troubles were almost solved, at least temporarily. Moreover, this was the stronghold of the southern barbaric land, where Chushio's situation was the safest. This kind of environment could tolerate Chushio's courting death to a certain extent. Previously, when fighting against Yindra, Chushio had a deep understanding of the power of the creation demonic path. The creation demonic path was a power that could directly reach the power of the demonic path, the cycle of life and death, destruction to the extreme, new life. Without destruction, how could there be a new life? Boundless demonic energy lingered around Chushio, turning into the extremely gloomy primitive devil cave. This was the darkest place in the world, the birthplace of the demonic path. But in the deepest part of the primitive devil cave, there was a little light shining, a glimmer of light in the darkness, very dazzling. In the glimmer of light, a green sprout rose tenaciously, representing vitality, representing creation. In the past, when he killed Yin Tualuo, it was this seemingly inconspicuous sprout, but it was the manifestation of the demonic path of creation that had evolved to the extreme. It had even caused the source of yin and yang to tremble, even though it was only a trace. And now, Chushio deliberately made the yin and yang origin in his body shake more than last time. Although it was only a trace, the power was several times more than last time. But the next moment, Chushio's face suddenly changed. He immediately stopped stimulating the yin and yang origin, and began to run the secret method of Sanskrit. In an instant, his figure suddenly turned into a strange state where half of it was as black as ink, and the other half was shrouded in a hot golden light. Two forces surged back and forth in Chushio's body, as if they wanted to break free from the shackles of his body. In the end, Chushio suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, and the demonic energy and golden light around him faded away. His whole face was pale, as if he was hollowed out. The attempt failed, but the courting death succeeded. Chapter 1339. The Sanskrit sect was right about one thing. Source energy was something that humans could not control. Although the ripples created by the passive fusion of the source energies of yin and yang had allowed Chu Xiu to break through a level of martial immortal, it had also seriously injured his physical body. This time around, Chu Xiu was even more daring to take the initiative to activate the source energy of yin and yang. Although it was only a tiny bit of the source energy, it was not something that the current Chu Xiu could withstand. As for the secret technique researched by the Sanskrit sect, it was able to change one's physical attributes to allow one to carry the source energy. While it was still somewhat useful, it was only somewhat. The prerequisite was that one's own power had to be strong enough. Otherwise, even if one possessed the extreme yang body or the extreme yin body, it would still be useless. Chu Xiu took a deep breath and swallowed a bunch of medicinal pellets. He decided not to touch that thing for the time being. Although the source energy was very strong, so strong that it was unimaginably strong. And if Chu Xiu could borrow a trace of its power would be comparable to a top-notch divine ability, or even surpass the clear sky illuminating image. Unfortunately, it was not a power that belonged to a human. It would appear that the Sanskrit sect was not spouting nonsense for the sake of researching that source energy. Right at that moment, Ji Xinlua suddenly knocked on the door and walked in. Carefully, he said, "My lord, I found something that might be useful to you." "Oh, what is it?" Ji Xinlua took out a few pieces of paper and said, "These are some secrets that the old hall master discovered when he was still alive. He had discussed and researched them with the church master and the other two hall masters. Later on, the old hall master passed away. After Xian Jialua took over the position of hall master, he did not pay attention to these things. However, I feel that my lord will be interested in these things." The traitor Ji Xinlua was quite competent. He knew that the Sanskrit sect still had Ji Xinlua. This meant that he could not return. At the very least, he would not be able to return before the Sanskrit sect was destroyed. Thus, he could only try his best to find an opportunity to perform meritorious deeds in front of Chu Xiu. Only then would he be able to stand out. Sometimes, traitors had to be more loyal than their own people, and they had to put in more effort, because they knew that they had no way out. If they didn't grasp everything before them, then they would really have no other way out. Chu Xiu took the paper and looked at it. The things written on it were quite novel, because the things written on it were actually related to luck. Although the strength of the previous lord of Vishnu Palace was not as good as the other two lords, he was an extremely knowledgeable person, and had studied many things. Based on the Great Ancient Tribulation and the evolution of the Daluocean in the past 10,000 years, he discovered the existence of destiny. Heaven and earth had the cycle of the 4 seasons, and humans also had their own destiny. The Lord of Vishnu Palace believed that human beings were not special in this world. All living beings had to go through the cycle of life and death. Human beings also had to go through it. It was just that it would take a long time. The Great Ancient Tribulation was a cycle of karmic luck aimed at the human race, but it was not a dead end. Before the arrival of the Great Ancient Tribulation, there were already many signs, such as meteorites falling from the sky, earth dragons turning over, and so on. As a result, at that time, only a few sects such as Spiritual Treasure Temple chose to stand up and fight against the Great Ancient Tribulation with their own strength. The other sects chose to flee. The final result was needless to say. Those cultivators found the existence of the Daluocean race, and collectively fled to the Daluocean race, giving up on the lower realm. If those cultivators did not leave at that time, but chose to abandon their sectarian views, and unite to fight against the Great Ancient Tribulation together, then they were very likely to survive the Great Ancient Tribulation while preserving half of their strength, and then usher in a new round of luck prosperity. Among them, there was even a mention of Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji. The Daluocean sects did not know much about Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji. They only knew that they came from the lower realm. But according to the level of vitality they observed from the array in the Daluocean Divine Palace, the vitality in the lower realm was not rich. It was far inferior to that of the Daluocean race, and even inferior to the heavenly realm that had been destroyed 10,000 years ago. Therefore, the existence of Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji itself was unreasonable. But here the old temple master of the Vishnu palace also gave an explanation. He guessed that when all the cultivators in the heavenly realm left, those who stayed in the lower realm were either ordinary people, some low-level cultivators, or those cultivators who were not valued by the sections. Therefore, the inheritance they received was actually incomplete, and their strength was weaker than under normal circumstances. But the luck belonged to the entire human race, and it would not change. Because most of the experts and geniuses in the heavenly realm left, the luck of the heavenly realm was not evenly distributed, resulting in all of it gathering in one or two people, infinitely increasing their strength. This was also possible. At present, 10,000 years had passed in the Daluotian race. Many cultivators could already feel the changes in the Daluotian race. For example, the vitality in secret realms and other places was declining faster and faster, and so on. The luck of the Daluotian race might also decline from prosperity. If they did not want to return to the heavenly realm in the past, then the best way was to unite the scattered luck into one, and jointly resist the disaster of the decline of luck. But unfortunately, in the end, the old temple master's suggestion was not accepted by the cult leader of Brahma Palace, and at the same time, it was also ridiculed by the temple masters of Brahma Palace and Shiva Palace. The sudden death of the old temple master of the Vishnu Palace also had something to do with the fact that he had spent a lot of effort to study this matter. But when Chu Xiu saw the suggestion of the old temple master of the Vishnu Palace to the cult leader of Brahma Palace, he felt that it was normal. If he was the cult leader of Brahma Palace, he would also not agree to the suggestion of the old temple master of the Vishnu Palace. The old temple master actually wanted Brahma Palace and Heavenly Jewel Buddha to give up the old prejudice and join hands to completely control the western region. Then, with the western region as the foundation, they would annex the southern region and the eastern region, and finally join hands with the Tao sect to gather the power of Tao and Buddha to overcome the luck tribulation. Not to mention that the luck tribulation was just the old temple master's speculation for the time being. Even if it was true, it was like a fantasy to want Brahma Palace to give up the old resentment and join hands with Heavenly Jewel Buddha. In other words, even if Brahma Palace agreed, Heavenly Jewel Buddha might not necessarily agree. This matter was kept in mind by Chu Xiu. Although he could not completely believe everything that the old temple master of the Vishnu Palace had deduced, what he said was not far from the truth, especially his inference about the lower realm. Although he had never been to the lower realm. Luck, if the rise of Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji itself represented the gathering of the luck of the lower realm, then where was Chu Xiu's luck? Luck was something that could not be seen or touched. It only existed in other people's guesses. Moreover, if it was said that Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji could reach this step only because of the illusory luck, Chu Xiu would certainly not believe it. Perhaps they were able to reach the peak because of luck, but it was not because luck chose them, but because luck could only choose them. Because in the lower realm at that time, only Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji could reach the peak, and only they were qualified to touch the illusory luck. Ji Xinlua was still watching carefully on the side. Chu Xiu waved his hand at him and said, "The things you brought are very useful. Don't worry, I, Chu Xiu, will not mistreat people who work hard. But because of your current special identity, you can't go out and show your face for the time being. When Brahma Palace is destroyed, the position you can get will be even higher than that of a palace master of the Vishnu Palace." Ji Xinlua thanked Chu Xiu profusely and left, but in his heart he did not agree with Chu Xiu's words. He admitted that Chu Xiu was indeed very strong, but now he was under Chu Xiu's command only to save his life. He did not believe that Chu Xiu could destroy Brahma Palace. He was the palace master of Brahma Palace. No matter what, he was also regarded as a quasi-high-level person of Brahma Palace. Because of this, he knew the horror of Brahma Palace. Chu Xiu could destroy a palace of Brahma Palace with a sneak attack, but he did not believe that Brahma Palace, which had been passed down for more than 10,000 years, could be destroyed by Chu Xiu. After Ji Xinlua left, Chu Xiu also began to recuperate in seclusion. The impact of the yin and yang origin had caused a lot of damage to Chu Xiu's physical body. Even if his physical body was extremely strong now, The last power of the yin and yang origin was not something that Chu Xiu could withstand. After more than a month, Chu Xiu came out of seclusion and called Mei Qinglian to ask if there was any situation in the western region. Mei Qinglian shook her head and said, "There is no movement in the western region. According to the information that Fatty Sikongtan sent, Brahma Palace in the western region has lost a palace, can be said to be a heavy loss. Moreover, there is no news of the return of the world venerate, so Brahma Palace can only be vigilant and do not make any move. As for Heaven Luo Treasure Rakshasa, they did not do anything other than keeping an eye on Brahma Palace, as if they are ready to stop while they are ahead, and do not intend to fight Brahma Palace to the end." Chu Xiu nodded his head. This was similar to what he had guessed before. With this kind of reaction, Brahma Palace should not be looking for trouble with him. But at this time, Mei Qinglian suddenly said, "Although there is nothing in the western region, there is something in the northern region. You should pay attention to it." "What is it?" "You should know Xinghe Lu's cultivator, the one who has a good relationship with Yi Weikong. While you were in seclusion, Xinghe Lu's cultivator teamed up with 3 other prime venerates to build the stargazing martial courtyard in the northern heavenly pillar mountain. All prime venerates' disciples of major sects, and rogue cultivators are allowed to come and cultivate there, regardless of origin or sect. As long as you do not have a master, you can come and go as you please. You can come and go as you please. You are free to come and go as you please." After saying that, Mei Qinglian frowned and said, "That guy must be crazy. What's the difference between him doing this and giving away cultivation methods and experience points for free? The other Daoyuotian experts only talk about martial Dao, but he took out core cultivation methods to explain. This is crazy." Hearing Mei Qinglian's words, a word suddenly popped up in Chu Xiu's mind. Providence. Exhaling deeply, Chu Xiu's eyes flickered with an indecipherable light. A peak 9th heaven martial immortal expert will not go crazy, let alone suffer a loss. I'm afraid he is fighting for providence. Chapter 1340. During the ancient sovereign convention, Meng Xinghe had come to Chu Xiu and said some irrelevant things. At that time, Chu Xiu was still a little puzzled, and did not know what Meng Xinghe meant. Now that he thought about the issue of providence, Chu Xiu could roughly guess what Meng Xinghe was planning. The key to providence lay in people. One person's providence could not compete with the whole world, but a group of people could. Although Gu Zun's lineage was strong, its only shortcoming was its small number of people. Therefore, when Meng Xinghe established the Galaxy Martial Arts Academy, he abandoned sectarian views. In fact, what he received was the providence of hundreds of families. Every warrior who came to the Galaxy Martial Arts Academy to cultivate, even if they belonged to other factions, still owed a portion of the Galaxy Martial Arts Academy's providence and karma. Mei Qinglian did not know what he meant. Chu Xiu directly said in a deep voice, "Call Old Wei and the others here. I have something to tell them." If the matter of providence was just the Lord of Vishnu Palace's own speculation, although Chu Xiu would remember this matter, he would not pay too much attention to it. But now what Meng Xinghe was doing was directly related to the word providence. At least in Chu Xiu's opinion, it was not far from the truth. When everyone arrived, Chu Xiu told them about this matter, and everyone present had a thoughtful look on their faces. Chen Qingdi touched his head and said, "I say, is this kind of thing reliable? Why do I feel that it is very mysterious? I have fought with heaven and earth, fought with people, and finally reached this step with great difficulty. Can it be explained by the word providence?" Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "Providence is the providence of this world, not for you alone. If a magic weapon falls from the sky, and the strong see it, it is called providence. Even if the weak pick it up, they will be devoured by the weapon spirit. So do you think this person has providence or no providence? Therefore, in my opinion, fate does exist. The actions of the Lord of Vishnu Palace and Meng Xinghe have proved that they have realized the existence of fate." At this moment, Lu Jianghe suddenly said, "I agree." Everyone turned to look at Lu Jianghe. Lu Jianghe had a rare look of contemplation on his face as he said, "Now that you mention it, I do recall something. Previously, when the sect master fought for hegemony in the pugilistic world, and completely shook the world with the power of the Kunlun devil cult. He once said, "The destiny of the devil Dao belongs to me." Back then I flattered. I told the sect master that with the strength of our holy sect, let alone the providence of the fiend Dao, even the providence of the world would definitely be in our hands. But at that time, the sect master pointed to the east and said that half of it was still in Ningxuanji's hands. At that time, I thought that the sect master was only talking about strength. But now, it seems that the providence he mentioned should mean the providence. Since these words came from Dugu Weiwei's mouth, Chu Xiu could actually verify it with Heavenly Soul. But Chu Xiu always had a trace of vigilance against Heavenly Soul, so he didn't intend to ask. Chen Qingdi rubbed his chin and said, "Even if the providence really exists, what does Meng Xinghe's establishment of the Star River Martial Academy have to do with us?" Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Of course it has to do with us. The providence is like a cake. If you take a bite, I will take a bite. In the 4 Daoyuotian regions, every top sect can take a bite of the cake. As for the parts that don't taste good, no one has taken a bite yet. Once Meng Xinghe's Star River Martial Academy was established, it would definitely attract those who were not wanted yet. Among the 4 regions, the Buddhist sect of the Western Domain and the Dao sect of the Northern Domain are deeply rooted. Only the people of the Southern Domain and Eastern Domain can be attracted to the Star River Martial Academy. I have been planning for the Eastern Domain for so long. How can the Star River Martial Academy meddle in the Eastern Domain?" Among the 4 Daoyuotian regions, Chu Xiu had always stayed in the Eastern Domain, where he had the greatest reputation. Now that he had turned from enemies to friends with High Heaven sect, and was a member of the Imperial Heaven Pavilion, he only had Cold River City as his enemy. Therefore, as long as the opportunity was right, the Eastern Domain could belong to Chu Xiu at some point in time. It would have been fine if he didn't know about the providence, but now that he knew, Chu Xiu wouldn't let anyone snatch something from him. Wei Shuya said in a deep voice, "So you are going to learn from Meng Xinghe?" Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "Meng Xinghe has his own path, and I have mine. He is now the leader of the Prime Venerables, and there are several Prime Venerables around him. His reputation can be said to have shaken the Daoyuotian. When Meng Xinghe and Wu Yuan appeared, the entire 4 Daoyuotian regions were shaken. My current reputation is still inferior to Meng Xinghe's. Therefore, I just need to guard the Eastern Domain. As for the method, it's very simple. We have been in the Daoyuotian for so long, and now is the time." Chu Xiu looked at the people present and said in a deep voice, "I have decided to leave the Imperial Heaven Pavilion and rebuild the holy cult in the Daoyuotian Eastern Domain. I will make the name of Kunlun resound throughout the Daoyuotian continent." No one objected to this suggestion. In fact, even Wei Shuya and the other elders of the Kunlun demon sect revealed looks of excitement in their eyes. In fact, for them in the past, as long as the Kunlun devil cult restored its former glory in the lower realm, they would be satisfied. But now, after seeing the vast world of the Daoyuotian continent, how could they be willing to dominate the lower realm? However, after the excitement, Old Man Wei was the first to calm down and said in a deep voice, "The Eastern Domain now has 3 top forces. If you suddenly want to establish a force, will High Heaven Sect and Imperial Heaven Pavilion agree? Also, if we directly use Kunlun as our name, will people suspect that we are from the lower realm?" Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "No, Kunlun Mountain did not have any forces 10,000 years ago. After Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji came to the Daoyuotian continent, no one mentioned anything about the lower realm. The term Kunlun exists in many ancient books, and will not be suspected. As for Imperial Heaven Pavilion and High Heaven Sect, I will inform them. After a month, we will hold the founding ceremony of our holy church in the southern wilderness." The founding ceremony was complicated and required many things to be mobilized. So Chu Xiu handed it over to Wei Shuya to handle. Wei Shuya was mature and experienced, so he was most suitable for this kind of thing. Moreover, Chu Xiu first went to Imperial Heaven Pavilion and High Heaven Sect to deliver the invitations, of course, to tell them about this matter. Outside Imperial Heaven Pavilion, when they heard that Chu Xiu had come to visit, Zhong Qiushui, Lu Sanjin, and a group of Imperial Heaven Pavilion elders even came out to greet him personally. In fact, Imperial Heaven Pavilion was also a little confused about Chu Xiu's attitude. Even they themselves did not know what kind of attitude they should use to treat Chu Xiu. Nominally, Chu Xiu was still the county governor of Imperial Heaven Pavilion. But in fact, Chu Xiu had long left Imperial Heaven Pavilion and was in charge of the southern wilderness. At the beginning, Zhong Qiushui paid the price of the entire southern wilderness being under Chu Xiu's control in exchange for Chu Xiu standing on his side in the fight for the position of pavilion master. From then on, the two sides were no longer in a subordinate relationship. Moreover, with the recent news that Chu Xiu had destroyed Vishnu Palace, Zhong Qiushui was even more certain of this. Two martial immortals and the entire Vishnu Palace. This force was already stronger than Imperial Heaven Pavilion, but in the end, it was still destroyed by Chu Xiu. In this case, if Chu Xiu wanted to destroy his Imperial Heaven Pavilion, wouldn't it be very easy? Therefore, from the beginning when he saw Chu Xiu, Zhong Qiushui had been feeling very awkward because he did not know what kind of attitude he should use to face Chu Xiu. Seeing Zhong Qiushui like this, Chu Xiu did not bother to keep him in suspense anymore. Chu Xiu said directly, "Pavilion Master, I'm actually here to tell you something this time." "Oh, what is it?" With a solemn expression, Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "I'm preparing to completely leave Imperial Heaven Pavilion and establish an independent force in the southern wilderness, called the Kunlun Devil Cult. A month later, I'll hold a founding ceremony in the southern wilderness, and I'd like to invite Imperial Heaven Pavilion to participate." In the lower realm, the fiend path was condemned as heresy, so most of the martial artists of the Kunlun Devil Cult called themselves the Sacred Sect. However, it did not matter in the Daluotian. The fiend path was also one of the many martial paths, and it was not a sensitive matter. Therefore, Chu Xiu directly called it the Devil Cult, and it could also distinguish the forces in the lower realm and the lower realm. The lower realm was the Sacred Sect, and the Daluotian was the Fiend Sect. As soon as he said that, the entire Imperial Heaven Pavilion fell silent, and it was dead silent. Even Lu Sanjin widened his eyes as if he did not expect Chu Xiu to actually say such a thing. After a while, an Imperial Heaven Pavilion elder jumped up immediately and pointed at Chu Xiu with a furious expression as he reprimanded, "Chu Xiu, you're ungrateful. If it weren't for Imperial Heaven Pavilion, how would you be where you are today? Now that your wings have grown, you want to divide Imperial Heaven Pavilion when it's in a weak period just because you have some strength. Do you think you're worthy of the old Pavilion Master's attention? Do you still?" Slap. Before that elder could finish speaking, he was sent flying by Zhong Qiushui's slap. As he wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, he looked at Zhong Qiushui in disbelief. Zhong Qiushui scoffed coldly. "Do you have the right to speak here? Shut up if you don't know the rules." Zhong Qiushui turned around and let out a long sigh. He smiled at Chu Xiu as if he was relieved. "Actually, you should have taken this step a long time ago. It's too late now. Should I address you as Cult Master Chu from now on? This title sounds a lot more pleasing to the ear. Don't worry, I'll be back in a month to attend the ceremony." Chu Xiu cupped his fists with a smile on his face and said, "Thank you, Pavilion Master. I'll take my leave now." After saying that, Chu Xiu immediately left. He did not even bother to look at the cultivator who had spoken rudely. After Chu Xiu left completely, everyone looked at Zhong Qiushui in confusion. Chu Xiu's independence from Imperial Heaven Pavilion was not only a huge blow to Imperial Heaven Pavilion's reputation, but Chu Xiu had also taken away one of Imperial Heaven Pavilion's counties, Kangwu County. Zhong Qiushui was someone who dared to fight to the death against Yi Weikong's Cold River City. Why would he concede in such a sullen manner when facing Chu Xiu? Chapter 1341. The people of the Imperial Sky Pavilion felt that Zhong Qiushui had changed. He was no longer the overbearing Zhong Qiushui. Facing everyone's gaze, Zhong Qiushui sighed and said, "When it's time to be tough, you're not tough. When it's time to be flexible, you don't know how to be flexible. What are all of you thinking? Do you know what's the situation in the southern barbaric land, including Kangwu County? They're all Chu Xiu's men. I've already promised Chu Xiu that Kangwu County, and the southern barbaric land will be handed over to Chushio to govern. Therefore, that place is no longer the territory of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Chushio's words are the law, and the words of the Imperial Sky Pavilion are basically equivalent to fart. In such a situation, what's the difference if Chushio establishes a sect or not? Also, set your sights further away. Don't always stare at such a small place like the Eastern region. Chushio's position is stuck between the Eastern region and the Southern region. Once the Southern region is prepared to attack the Eastern region, the first to face will definitely be Chushio. Therefore, no matter what Chushio's identity is, as long as he still admits that he's from the Eastern region, he's the ally of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. In the past, the old pavilion master treated him well. Both of us also have some kinship. Zhong Qiushui paused. Just when the others thought he had finished speaking, Zhong Qiushui said faintly, "Of course, there's another more important matter. Which one of you is Chushio's opponent? Who can destroy the Vishnu temple, one of the three main temples of the Sanskrit sect, with a surprise attack? Is it him or you? The entire Imperial Sky Pavilion can't do it. The pugilistic world is a place where strength is important. The pool of the Imperial Sky Pavilion is too shallow to accommodate a true dragon. Why don't we generously do him a favor and let him leave calmly? If we really shed all pretense of cordiality, we'll only be trapped in our own web and won't get any benefits." It was rare for Zhong Qiushui to be clear-headed. This time he was very open-minded, even more so than Lu Sanjin. When the other people from the Imperial Sky Pavilion heard Zhong Qiushui's words, they stopped talking nonsense, including the elder who was slapped earlier. Chushio was already unstoppable. Even if they wanted to stop him, they wouldn't be able to. A few days later, Chushio arrived at High Heaven Sect at the fastest speed possible. As soon as he saw Chushio, Fang Yinglong laughed heartily as he walked over and said, "Chu, you have destroyed the Vishnu Palace of Sanskrit sect and made a name for yourselves in the 4 regions. Congratulations." Chushio shook his head and said, "That's not a good thing. If it wasn't for the Sanskrit sect causing trouble for me again and again, I wouldn't have made a move against them. Now I'm in the limelight, but when the Sanskrit sect gets the chance, they won't let me off." Chushio's words made Fang Yinglong speechless. "You already know the consequences, yet you still acted so ruthlessly, directly destroying a temple of the Sanskrit sect." Fang Yinglong could only laugh awkwardly as he welcomed Chushio into the hall. After finding Qin Baiyuan and Ling Huxiu, Fang Yinglong asked directly, "May I know why Chu has come to my High Heaven sect this time?" Fang Yinglong had roughly figured out Chushio's temper. He was definitely the kind of person who wouldn't visit a temple without a reason. If he had nothing to do, he wouldn't have come to High Heaven sect to catch up with them. Chushio said directly, "I plan to leave Imperial Sky Pavilion and establish my own sect in the southern wilderness, called the Kunlun Devil Cult. The founding ceremony will be held in a month, so I came to invite Sect Master Fang and everyone from High Heaven Sect to attend the ceremony and help me promote it." After listening to Chushio, Fang Yinglong, Qin Baiyuan, and Ling Huxianshan looked at each other, their eyes filled with shock. They didn't expect that Chushio would come to talk to them about this. But after thinking about it carefully, they felt it was normal. For example, a sect in the Southern Territory could establish a top force with a first or second Heaven Martial Immortal. On the surface, Chushio had the strength of a third Heaven Martial Immortal, but he could almost rival a fifth Heaven Martial Immortal. A temple of the Sanskrit sect was destroyed just like that. Most of the people in the pugilistic world only saw Chushio's strength. However, some of the martial artists from the big sects saw the power behind Chushio. Killing In Tuoyuo was easy, as long as Chushio was strong enough. But how many elite masters were needed to break through the Brahma sect's main hall and exterminate Vishnu temple? It wasn't easy to cultivate them, but Chushio had such power under his command. It could be said that Chushio was stronger than Imperial Sky Pavilion now, so it wasn't strange for him to make such a choice. After a while, Fang Yinglong cupped his hands and said, "Congratulations to Cult Master Chu. But there's one more thing we need to know. After the establishment of Kunlun Devil Cult, will Cult Master Chu's attitude towards the Eastern Territory change?" Fang Yinglong didn't care what Imperial Sky Pavilion thought. As the #1 sect in the Eastern Territory, He was only worried about the changes in the Eastern Territory. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Sect Master Fong, please rest assured. Kunlun Devil Cult is established in the southern barbaric land and will guard the Eastern Territory forever. I'm from the Eastern Territory, and I have deep grievances with the Southern Territory martial world. No matter what, my attitude will not change." Fong Yinglong stood up and solemnly cupped his hands and said, "I hope that from now on, High Heaven Sect and Kunlun Devil Cult will never become enemies and will guard the Eastern Territory together." Chu Xiu also stood up and cupped his hands. Definitely. Both sides spoke with certainty, but in reality, even they themselves knew that it was basically impossible. They didn't fall out now because they had a common goal and common interests. Within a month after leaving High Heaven Sect, the news that Kunlun Devil Cult was about to be established had spread throughout the Eastern Territory and the 4 Daluotian territories. The establishment of a top sect with 3 martial immortals was considered a major event in the entire Daluotian continent. Moreover, in the Eastern Territory, Kunlun Devil Cult directly spread the news that Kunlun Devil Cult was recruiting a large number of disciples. Not only that, but the entire sect could directly join the Kunlun Devil Cult. The Starry River Martial Institution established by Meng Xinghe was very peaceful. Every bit of opportunity that could be pulled over was a bit of opportunity, and every bit of karmic luck was a bit of karmic luck. As for Chu Xiu, he was preparing to directly copy the route of the Kunlun Devil Cult in the lower realm. Cultivators with loose cultivator backgrounds who wanted to join the Kunlun Devil Cult would be accepted regardless of whether they were good or bad. However, only those who were strong enough and had outstanding talent could be recruited into the various halls of the Kunlun Devil Cult, while the weak could only be at the lowest level. However, Chu Xiu didn't mind having too many people. The Kunlun Devil Cult in the Daluotian continent was not smaller than the lower realm. As for the other small sects and families who were willing to join the Kunlun Devil Cult, they could also become its vassals. As long as they performed well, their patriarch and sect master could even become a demon envoy of the Kunlun Devil Cult, and their disciples could also formally join the Kunlun Devil Cult. In fact, although this method could make the strength of the Kunlun Devil Cult skyrocket in a short period of time, the drawbacks were also very obvious. That was, their sense of belonging to the Kunlun Devil Cult would be greatly reduced. However, this didn't matter. Whether it was the Dugu Weiwei from 500 years ago or the current Chu Xiu, what they required from their subordinates was never loyalty, but obedience and ability. 500 years ago, when the Kunlun Devil Cult was at its peak, there were countless vassals under their command who dared to rebel. Only after the Kunlun Devil Cult was destroyed did some vassal forces betray the Kunlun Devil Cult. However, there were also some vassal forces that were loyal, such as the Yin Demon Sect. This was enough for Chu Xiu. When he was around, he could suppress this group of people with his prestige. When he was not around, if the Kunlun Devil Cult couldn't even suppress this group of people, it would prove that the Kunlun Devil Cult had already gone from prosperity to decline. It was already on the verge of collapse. Therefore, at that time, even if they were loyal, it would be useless. When Chu Xiu's words came out, the entire Eastern Territory was in an uproar. No sectarian bias, regardless of origin, and even if you wanted your entire family to join, it wouldn't affect your own inheritance. This kind of generous conditions could already attract many cultivators. Those cultivators who were rogue cultivators and looked down upon by the top sects such as High Heaven Sect had already set off for the southern barbaric land. There were also some small sects and families that were often bullied by the big sections. They also decided to join the Kunlun Devil Cult and join Chu Xiu in exchange for a backer. In the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect in Fonglin County, Lin Fengwu looked at the news about the Kunlun Devil Cult and said to Lin Yazi with a firm look, "Father, I've decided to merge the entire Nine Phoenix Sword Sect into the Kunlun Devil Cult and become a vassal of the Kunlun Devil Cult. I also want to join the Kunlun Devil Cult." At this time, Lin Fengwu had already reached the true fire soul refining realm, and her talent was outstanding. At this time, she had reached the peak of the true fire soul refining realm, and her combat power was even stronger than her father, Lin Yazi. So during this time, Lin Yazi had actually begun to gradually retire. handing over the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect to his daughter. The Nine Phoenix Sword Sect had suffered great changes, and Lin Yazi's thoughts had long since changed. So what if they were a man or a woman? He had no son, no accomplished disciple, only such an outstanding daughter, so he had decided to officially hand over the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect to Lin Fengwu. After listening, Lin Yazi sighed and said, "Joining is fine. You can make the decisions in the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect now. But daughter, have you not forgotten that official Chu?" Lin Fengwu shook her head and said with a firm look, "I chose to let the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect merge with the Kunlun Devil Cult not because of official Chu, but for the sake of our Nine Phoenix Sword Sect. Our Nine Phoenix Sword Sect is not the strongest in Fonglin County. And after joining the Kunlun Devil Cult, we have a backer. Also, our Nine Phoenix Sword Sect's inheritance is limited, and if I want to step into the Heaven and Earth Mystic Attainment realm, I can only wait for time. However, if I join a large sect like the Imperial Sky Pavilion, I will definitely give up the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect. Only the Kunlun Devil Cult doesn't have such restrictions. For me and the entire Nine Phoenix Sword Sect, joining the Kunlun Devil Cult is the right choice." Lin Fengwu's words were clear and logical, but only she knew what exactly she was thinking in her heart. Regardless of the reason, the entire eastern region was in an uproar because of the establishment of the Kunlun Devil Cult. Within a month, all the large sects had already swarmed into the southern barbaric land. At the same time, regardless of whether the relationship between the other three regions was good or bad, they also sent people to attend the ceremony according to the usual practice. Chapter 1342. At the edge of Kangwu County, in the land of southern barbarism. This place was no longer the same as when Chu Xiu first came, where the dense forest was overgrown with vegetation and wild beasts everywhere. Instead, the martial artists of the Kunlun Devil Cult opened up a wide road. The surrounding barbarian tribes also escaped into the depths of the dense forest because of the threat of the Black Luo tribe, and the various resources provided by Chu Xiu, forming a barrier for the Kunlun Devil Cult. Palaces and pavilions rose from the depths of the dense forest. Not only did they not feel out of place, but there was even a sense of desolation and grandeur. A portion of the East Region martial artists walked on the main road and looked at the surrounding buildings. There were also groups of Kunlun Devil Cult disciples dressed in black with cold expressions and extremely murderous aura on their bodies. Everyone couldn't help but shiver. Previously, they thought that Chu Xiu's decision to establish the Kunlun Devil Cult was only made after his strength skyrocketed. However, looking at the buildings and palaces in the land of southern barbarism, as well as the martial artists cultivated by his subordinates, was it possible that all of these were prepared in a hurry? Obviously, a long time ago, when Chu Xiu was still a disciple of the Emperor Sky Pavilion, and was still fighting for the Emperor Sky Pavilion, he actually already had the intention to stand on his own feet. From this point, they could see the depth of Chu Xiu's schemes. However, he was actually able to hold on until he fell out with the Emperor Sky Pavilion. In the end, the Emperor Sky Pavilion even personally came to congratulate the establishment of the Kunlun Devil Cult. This was simply unbelievable. At this moment, everyone suddenly realized that there was a dispute in front of them. A martial artist dressed in luxurious clothes shouted at the Kunlun Devil Cult disciple, who was guarding the door as if he was very dissatisfied. What does the Kunlun Devil Cult mean by this? Official Chu said that we, the small sects, are welcome to come and seek refuge, but in the end, you don't even let us enter the door. Are you looking down on our Linqijiang family? The disciple of the Kunlun Devil Cult who was guarding the door restrained himself. He knew that today was a big day for the Kunlun Devil Cult to establish their sect in the Dalyu Ocean, so he didn't want to blow things up. One had to know that he was an old man who had fought alongside Chu Xiu ever since he joined the Azure Dragon Society. If anyone in the lower realms had dared to speak to him in such a manner, he would have long since slapped them across the face. But here he could only patiently explain. Patriarch Jiang, my Kunlun Devil Cult welcomes everyone, but today is my Kunlun Devil Cult's founding ceremony. Not only will there be warriors from the East region, but there will also be people from the other three regions, so we can't accommodate so many people. It would have been fine if only a few people from the Jiang clan had come. However, there are over 100 of you here. How can I let all of you in? The entire Kangwu County is my Kunlun devil cult's territory. Patriarch Jiang, you can only bring a few trusted subordinates in, and let the rest in Kangwu County. However, the Jiang clan's patriarch's attitude was extremely unyielding. He pointed at the disciple who was guarding the door and said angrily, "I don't care. You didn't say anything about this before. Official Chu is a man of great talent and strategy. He is broad-minded and tolerant. How could he do something like keep his guests outside the door? I think it's you little guards who are making things difficult for us with a chicken feather. Who is your superior? I want to see the higher-ups of the Kunlun devil cult and seek justice for me." On the other side, Lin Yazi and Lin Fengwu were also in the crowd. Seeing that the Jiang clan's patriarch was being unreasonable, Lin Fengwu immediately wanted to stand out and stop him, but she was stopped by Lin Yazi. "Silly girl. Do you think that fellow is causing trouble?" Lin Fengwu frowned and said, "Today is my Kunlun devil cult's grand opening day. If he isn't causing trouble, then what is he?" Lin Yazi was speechless. As expected, a grown girl cannot be kept at home. She hasn't even joined the Kunlun devil cult, and she's already saying, "My Kunlun devil cult." Lin Yazi explained, "That Jiang clan is able to mix in Linqi County like a fish in water. Does he look like an idiot to you? Would he dare to challenge the Kunlun devil cult at a time like this? He wouldn't dare even if he was given 2 guts. He was only using some tricks to attract official Chu's attention. Listen to his words. There isn't the slightest bit of slander towards official Chu in his words. Instead, he's praising him. When official Chu comes out and sees this scene, in order to win people's hearts, he'll definitely scold the disciple guarding the door. Then he'll put on a magnanimous appearance and welcome them in. When the time comes, the other small powers that want to join the Kunlun devil cult will see that official Chu has this kind of attitude towards the Jiang clan. They'll definitely be completely convinced. This is like buying a horse's bones with 1,000 pieces of gold. Right now, the Jiang clan wants to take the initiative to be that horse's bones. Girl, your strength isn't bad now, but you're still a bit lacking when it comes to playing tricks with these old foxes." After Lin Fengwu heard this, she laughed coldly and said, "If that's the case, then this Jiang clan is simply being too clever for their own good. They're playing with fire and burning themselves." Lin Yazi was stunned and said, "What did you say?" Lin Fengwu said indifferently, "Official Chu is scheming, but he's always disdained to play such low-level tricks. He won't mistreat his own people just to win people's hearts." Lin Yazi wanted to say something, but on the other side, 2 people slowly walked over. One of them was playing with a golden dragon-shaped flying dagger, while the other was expressionless, carrying a heavy sword on his back. They were Tanya and Yanbu Gui. Tanya said lazily, "I'm his superior who's looking for me?" The Jiang clan head had just stepped forward, but before he could say anything, Tanya's expression suddenly changed, and he said coldly, "Cripple him." Behind him, Yanbu Gui took a step forward, and the huge force caused the whole ground to tremble. The heavy sword pressed down like a mountain, but its speed was extremely fast, like a gray meteor, and the crowd could only see a shadow. Bang! An explosive sound rang out, and the shield of vigor on the Jiang clan head's body was like a piece of paper, easily torn apart. All the bones in his body were accurately smashed by Yanbu Gui, and he was directly sent flying. His whole body was covered in blood, and he had already lost consciousness. Tanya looked around and said lightly, "Today is the great day of the founding of our Kunlun devil cult, so it's not appropriate to kill, so I'll spare his life. What kind of trash dares to play tricks in front of the Kunlun devil cult? You really don't know what you're talking about." After saying that, Tanya pointed at the disciple guarding the door, and pointed at him resentfully. "Look at you, you've been following the cult leader for a long time. And you can't even carry a sword after sleeping with too many women? Why are you wasting so much time talking nonsense with this kind of trash? Remember, the Kunlun devil cult accepts all rivers into the sea, but once you're in the sea, don't use the tricks from the river to make a fool of yourself in the sea." The disciple guarding the door instantly turned red, and he defended himself. "I didn't sleep with women, I'm still a virgin." Tanya laughed and scolded him. Who cares if you're a virgin or not? You've never touched a woman, and you're so proud? Guard the door well, and remember what I said. Before leaving, Tanya also looked around at the people present. There was no smile in his eyes, only a cold chill. Tanya's words were not only directed at the disciple guarding the door, but also at them. There weren't many restrictions to join the Kunlun devil cult, but there were many rules, and the most basic rule was respect. The disciples of the small forces and the rogue martial artists present all shivered, and they obediently registered and entered one by one. Some people felt that they had brought too many people, and they immediately sent them away, leaving only 2 or 3 confidants, for fear of causing trouble. On the other side of the road, 2 monks were watching everything there. One of them was a young monk in white with his eyes closed. It was Fajing, and there was also a kind-looking old monk, but he had the cultivation of the 7th celestial layer. The old monk was the head of the heavenly Luo treasure temple's Xitigarbha pavilion, Jikong. He learned that the Kunlun devil cult was establishing a sect, so he came to attend the ceremony. Chu Xiu had cooperated with the heavenly Luo treasure temple twice, and both sides could be considered to have a good relationship. Of course, with Chu Xiu's strength, it was certainly not enough for the head of the Life Transformation Pavilion, Jishan Zen Master, to personally come to congratulate him. So they sent the prestigious head of the Xitigarbha Pavilion, Ji Kong, and the heir of the Life Transformation Pavilion, Fajing. This kind of combination could be considered to be giving face to Chu Xiu. Fajing, these people under Chu Xiu, what do you think of them? Fajing said in a deep voice. Their strength is strong, their background is deep, and their sense of belonging to the sect is very strong. Their bodies have a strong murderous aura, and it is obvious that they are the kind of martial artists who have walked out of countless battles. The most important thing is that Chu Xiu has a lot of these martial artists, even more than our Life Transformation Pavilion. No wonder he was able to destroy the Vishnu temple. This kind of martial artists, even if they are not martial immortals, not to mention destroying the Vishnu temple, they can even compete with the Shiva temple. Previously in the exalted divine palace, the few people under his command were not ordinary people, but now it seems that this is not his full strength. Ji Kong said doubtfully. That is why I am puzzled. Where did this Chu Xiu get these people? In recent years, I have not heard of any large-scale battles in the eastern region. How did he train these disciples? Fajing did not speak. Obviously he was also puzzled about this point. Ji Kong shook his head and said, Forget it, don't think too much about it. Chu Xiu destroyed the Vishnu temple, so he has formed a great enmity with the Sanskrit sect. They will definitely not let him go. Therefore the stronger he is, the better. As long as he can stop the Sanskrit sect, he will be a good ally for the heavenly Luo treasure temple. I heard that the Sanskrit sect also came this time? Fajing suddenly said. Ji Kong nodded and said, Maybe they saw us coming, so they also sent people. They probably don't want to admit in front of the Daluotian people that they lost miserably. Then if the Sanskrit people come looking for trouble, should we help? Ji Kong smiled and said, This is the founding ceremony of the Kunlun devil cult. Why should we join in the fun? Whether or not they will lose face, it is Chu Xiu's business. It has nothing to do with us. In other words, if he can't even solve this small matter, why should he open a sect? What faction? The Venerable Buddha said not to meddle in other people's business. The Venerable Buddha did not say that. Fajing's face was solemn. The Venerable Buddha said so many words. It is no big deal for this poor monk to add another one. Let's go in and see what this so-called Kunlun devil cult looks like. Chapter 1343. In front of the square of the central hall of the Kunlun devil cult, the ground was paved with black stone slabs, and the complex spirit array patterns shone with starlight, illuminating the entire square. The buildings of the entire Kunlun devil cult were square and flat. Although they were simple, they gave off a solemn and oppressive feeling, which was completely different from the Daluotian architectural style. This also made the cultivators of the small sects all look solemn, not daring to make any noise. When the Kunlun devil cult first said that it was going to be established, they thought that Chu Xiu's reputation was worth joining. But at that time they all thought that the Kunlun devil cult was just a grassroots organization, but now it seemed that its grandeur was even not inferior to that of big sects like High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion. The spirit arrays on the ground, in particular, were obviously the work of a master of spirit arrays and were not ordinary. Chu Xiu sat in the center of the square in front of the main hall, while Wei Shuya and the others sat around him, waiting for the auspicious time to come and start the founding ceremony. The Eastern Territory was close to the Water Pavilion, so almost all the people had arrived. Imperial Sky Pavilion was the first to arrive. Zhong Qiushui came in person with Lu Sanjin and a group of Imperial Sky Pavilion elders, giving Chu Xiu enough face. Imperial Sky Pavilion even gave Chu Xiu a big gift, which was an array plate that had been passed down from ancient times, the kind that could change its position at will. The production of array plates was much more difficult than spirit arrays because it had to be moved frequently, so the materials used were more precious. This scene also let the other sects of the Eastern Territory know that Chu Xiu had left Imperial Sky Pavilion, but there was no conflict between the two sides. Instead, they parted ways peacefully, and the relationship between the two sides was even good. High Heaven Sect also came. Fang Yinglong and Qin Baiyuan came with their disciples and presented gifts, leaving only Linghu Immortal Mountain to guard High Heaven Sect. This was also giving Chu Xiu enough face. Among these sects of the Eastern Territory, only Cold River City did not come. This also let everyone know how much Yi Weikong hated Chu Xiu. Many of the Daluotian sects were very particular about their reputation. Even if the two sides fought fiercely at times like this, both sides would still care about face. For example, High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion had been fighting ever since they descended to the mortal world. But once the two sides held some kind of big celebration, those who were supposed to come would come, although it was inevitable that there would be some tension. But this time, not a single person from Cold River City came. It could be imagined how much they hated Chu Xiu that they didn't even care about their dignity. After the people from the southern region arrived, people from the other regions also began to arrive. The martial artist standing guard at the entrance of the square shouted, "The Southern Domain's Heavenly Demon Sect congratulates." Other than the people from the East Domain, the Heavenly Demon Sect was the first to arrive from the Outer Domain. However, everyone knew that Chu Xiu had a friendly relationship with the Sky Devil Palace. Both sides had once joined hands to destroy the Blissful Devil Palace. Therefore, it wasn't strange for the Sky Devil Palace to be so proactive. Congratulations, Cult Master Chu. We, the Diabolism, finally have a powerful ally. Yuan Kongqing smiled and handed over the congratulatory gift with a very kind attitude. When he chose to help Chu Xiu pass on the information of the Sword Sect under the heavens, he was gambling on Chu Xiu's future. As a result, his gamble paid off. Chu Xiu's growth was even faster than he had imagined. As for whether Chu Xiu would have a conflict with his Heavenly Demon Palace, Yuan Kongqing wasn't worried at all. For 10,000 years, each domain had existed alone. If Chu Xiu was in the southern domain, Yuan Kongqing would be wary and even reject him, but in the east domain, the two sides could become allies. Palace Master Yuan is too polite, please sit down. After Yuan Kongqing arrived, the other sects of the southern domain, the Sword Sect under the heavens, the Great Thousand Sect, and the Battle God Sect also arrived. It was worth mentioning that Shengju Yuan stood on the side of the Sword Sect under the heavens, and the Sword Sect under the heavens had even brought Fang Qishao. However, seeing Fang Qishao's appearance, Chu Xiu was a little nervous. He knew Fang Qishao's character, and it was best not to expose himself on such an occasion. Fortunately, Fang Qishao knew that he was a spy, so he didn't look at Chu Xiu and the others, but looked left and right, as if he had never seen the world before. After being reprimanded by Mu Baishuang, he became obedient. 3 Pure Temple, Mysterious Heaven Realm, and Spirit Treasure Temple of the Northern Domain are here to congratulate you. Other than Spirit Treasure Temples in Lingzi, Chu Xiu hadn't had much contact with the other sects in the Northern Domain. However, such a big event like the establishment of a sect, the Northern Domain naturally had to make a trip after hearing the news. 3 Pure Temple sent an elder and Fang Yizhen, who had dealt with Chu Xiu in the Daluo Divine Palace. Only one elder from Mysterious Heaven Realm came. Spirit Treasure Temple sent Lingzi and a middle-aged Taoist. The Western Domain's Tianluo Treasure Temple is here to congratulate you. Ji Kong and Fa Jing walked into the hall and immediately attracted a lot of attention. Previously, both parties had joined forces to kill the Brahma sect's Vishnu Palace, and it had shaken the entire Daoyu Ocean, which was a big event. With the current relationship between both parties, even if they weren't official allies, in the eyes of other Daoyu Ocean martial artists, they were allies. Therefore, it was normal for the Tianluo Treasure Temple to send someone over. Congratulations to Cult Master Chu. Ji Kong had never dealt with Chu Xiu before, and Fa Jing was a man of few words, so both parties only exchanged a few words before they were invited to a seat of honor. Just when everyone thought that everyone had arrived and the ceremony could begin, the disciple outside the door announced loudly, Star River Martial Academy's Supremacy Fang Daochen is here to congratulate you. Hearing this name, everyone present had a strange expression. No one had expected the Star River Martial Academy to send someone over. In fact, when the Star River Martial Academy was established, everyone present had also sent someone over. However, compared to Chu Xiu, the Star River Martial Academy was much more low-key. The path that Meng Xinghe wanted to take was different from Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and pondered. Others thought that Chu Xiu and Meng Xinghe were taking different paths, but in fact, both of them had the same goal. They both wanted to obtain enough providence before the arrival of the era of great battles. With what he had done in the eastern region, the Star River Martial Academy could forget about recruiting a disciple in the eastern region. He believed that Meng Xinghe could also tell that both parties were now competitors. Fang Daochen was a middle-aged man dressed in Taoist robes. He was also a Taoist primogenitor. His Taoist name was Qing Hui, and he was a fourth firmament martial immortal. After entering, Fang Daochen waved his horsetail whisk and said to Chu Xiu in a deep voice, Congratulations to Cult Master Chu for establishing the Kunlun Devil Cult and making a name for himself in the eastern region. Cult Master Chu is also a member of the primogenitor's lineage. In the future, we must get closer to him. Two of the primogenitor's lineage have already appeared in the world. Unfettered Meng also hopes that the Star River Martial Academy, the Kunlun Devil Cult, and even the primogenitor's lineage will have a long life of providence. Fang Daochen emphasized the word fate, but it was hard to tell what he meant. Chu Xiu said indifferently, Daoist Fang, please take a seat. Please thank Unfettered Meng on my behalf. With so many people here, everyone thought that the event was about to begin. However, the gatekeeper's voice came from outside again. However, this time, the gatekeeper's voice was a little hesitant. He hemmed and hawed but did not call out the name. At this time, a slightly stiff voice said loudly, Luoshan tribe Xiao Wu and Long Shan. On behalf of the old barbarian king, congratulate Cult Master Chu for establishing the sect and passing it on for thousands of generations. Upon hearing this, everyone's expression suddenly changed. All the forces that bordered the 100,000 mountains had heard of the Luoshan tribe. Even those who had not heard of the Luoshan tribe knew of the existence of the old barbarian king, who was almost the strongest among the barbarians. What was he doing here when the Kunlun Devil Cult was establishing a sect? Fa Jing whispered to Ji Kong, Uncle Master, who is the old barbarian king? Although Fa Jing's cultivation was strong enough, he was still considered to be of the younger generation. He usually only focused on cultivation, so he did not know much about these things. Ji Kong said in a deep voice, That old man should be the most difficult to deal with among the barbarians. The barbarians' inheritance was endless. In addition to some of the barbarian tribes having some inherited artifacts, there would also be one or two top experts emerging in every generation of the barbarians. The old barbarian king was such in existence. Moreover, I heard that the old barbarian king was not simple. He even had some karma with some of the big Daoyu Ocean sections. But why would the barbarians rush to congratulate Chu Xiu? No, something was wrong. When the southern barbarian land was under the jurisdiction of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, there were frequent barbarian riots. But when it was under the control of Chu Xiu, there was not even a single riot. And how did Chu Xiu cross the 100,000 mountains to attack the Sanskrit sect? If it was just him alone, it wouldn't be a problem. But at that time Chu Xiu had brought tens of thousands of Kunlun demon cult elites with him. Even if those barbarians were blind, they would still be able to sense it. Ji Kong could detect these things, and so could everyone present. Everyone had a strange expression on their faces. Could it be that Chu Xiu had colluded with the barbarians? Of course, this was not a big deal. In fact, all the big sects had certain transactions with the barbarians. It was just that they did not put it on the surface. Moreover, they used shoddy goods to cheat the barbarians. If it was a small sect doing this, it was estimated that there would be people who would take care of it. But for an existence like Chu Xiu who could destroy a temple of the Sanskrit sect, no one would even care about it. At this time, there was a violent vibration on the ground, and there was a loud sound of friction. At the entrance of the square, Long San directly dragged a brown flood dragon into the square. The flood dragon was hundreds of feet long. Compared to the flood dragon, Long San's small giant-like body was not even as big as the flood dragon's head. As soon as he came in, he shouted, "This mountain flood dragon was personally hunted by the old barbarian king. I'm exhausted dragging it all the way here. I want to eat meat and drink wine." Next to Long San was a middle-aged man in a brocade robe. Although he was also dark-skinned and tall, his manner of dressing was no different from that of the Daluotian martial artists. He cupped his hands in a stiff Central Plains Chinese and said, "In order to congratulate the cult master Chu for establishing a sect, the old barbarian king specially went to the depths of the 100,000 mountains to hunt this earth flood dragon as a gift. Our tribe values friendship with friends the most. Official Chu established a sect in the southern barbarian land, and is our neighbor. May the friendship between both sides last forever." You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.